I had a thought about warning you about what I'm going to do this week, but I'm not sure about all the warnings. What I'm going to try to do is talk about Esav. So first of all, Esav is our hero for today. And I've spoken about Esav before, and a couple of the random things along the way have come out, but I'm going to try to do this in a little bit more of I use the word sophisticated. You know, we all have our dreams, but sophisticated. And what I'm going to try to do is also read the Midrashim, but ultimately to try to show where the Midrashim got what they said, going back to the Psukim themselves. Because again, there's always these various stages. And the other warning is that Esav, and I say this every year, I think, that Esav there's the biblical Esav in Chumash, and then there's the biblical Esav, turning into Edom, and which is what happens later on in history. And then of course you have the metamorphosis into Rome, and you have the further metamorphosis into Christianity when you look at certain Jewish sources. So you're never really sure who they're talking about, and sometimes it's suggested that the descriptions that Chazal have of the biblical Esav is inspired by that generation of destroying the temple, and they're kind of reading one into the other. So again, we've said that, and I want to push that all aside, and I only want to deal with the biblical Esav in this week's parsha, and so on. So I'm saying that's the first thing. Second, is anybody here familiar with the Goldwater rule?
What?
The Goldwater rule. Some of you should be old enough to remember it even. So, when Barry Goldwater ran for president, there were a whole bunch of people, psychiatrists, who gave their opinion of his emotional ability or mental ability to be president based upon...
We're sorry.
You're sorry.
I'm not going to answer until we get a
Whew. Based upon... Based upon his public persona. So of course the question is, based on somebody's public persona, how much can you talk about who they really are? And the American Psychiatric Association actually passed a rule that psychiatrists are not permitted to give a diagnosis of a public persona who they've never met in person, and they've actually put through whatever battery of tests they put through. By the way, does that stop any... Again, just Trump, for example, did that stop anybody from going and giving? So again, if you're just an amateur, so of course you can do it. So I kind of wonder, is there some kind of a Goldwater rule when it comes to analyzing biblical characters? So I think that may be, and again, not to the way that one would normally articulate it, but that may be the background of what takes place in Israel today between those people, even among religious Zionism, those people who will look at the Tanakh and what they call sometimes begova einayim, where you look at them as a regular person you could put on the couch, a regular person you can analyze, you can talk about how their mother mistreated them. By the way, I'm getting way ahead of myself now. Or you say, no, these people, all the biblical characters are people completely outside of our realm of understanding, and we fundamentally have no right to go and to try to humanize them in a way where we treat them as if they're regular people. So as I said, it's not a question of them actually channeling the Goldwater rule, yes or no, but it is nonetheless interesting that there is this parallel approach when it comes to the characters. So if we were to use Esav and try to use him through modern, and I can actually go in two directions now, modern philosophy going on for the last 200 years or so, 150 years or so, or on the other hand, through modern psychiatry and psychology, so we can have a field day with Esav. And of course, the starting point is going to go to this fundamental issue, and that is to what extent the treatment that it has of his mother is one which is appropriate and impacts him. So let's, as I said, let's start from the beginning. Enough introductions. Let's read what it says. Source number 1, Ve'ela Toldot Yitzchak ben Avram, Avram alidi Yitzchak. So the first thing that we're told is when it comes to Yitzchak, Yitzchak is the son of Avraham. He is like Avraham, and maybe even right there's a reason to pause and to contemplate. part of the challenge of Yitzchak's life is that Yitzchak, to a very great extent, only does things that his father did. He is not the pioneer, he's not the revolutionary, he's not the person who walks in, onto the stage and then just does all of these radically different things from everyone different. Yitzchak's challenge is to do what his father did. So therefore, again, if we want to get into our psychological nuances and issues, Avraham, you can talk about rebelling against his father, but Yitzchak, on the other hand, his challenge is following his father. So there's a lot less excitement when it comes to Yitzchak. But then again, he's the first one who's FFB, as it were, and he's the first one now who has those particular challenges of keeping the tradition and passing it on to the next generation. ויהי יצחק בן 40 שנה בקחתו רבקה בת בתואל הארמי מפדן ארם אחות לבן הארמי לא לאישה. He's 40 years old when he gets married, and one point of information that we don't know, we'll never know, there is nothing in the text about it, and that is what was the age of Rivka when he met her, when he married her, when she had children, and when she died. None of that information is in the Torah. If you look at various midrashim, you can find answers to all of those questions. None of them are based upon any kind of clear statement in the text itself. There's inferences, and some of them are better, some of them are worse. I'm sorry for putting it that way, but I'll say it again. We have no idea how old she was when she got married. And again, those midrashim that try to paint Rivka as 3 years old when she met, or when she got married, what they're really doing is as much as Yitzchak follows his father, she follows the same path of Avraham, because just as Avraham finds God at the age of 3 and leaves his father's house and so on and so forth, she takes that same path. She does the same thing. So making her 3 years old actually makes her following that whole Avraham model. I believe there's other reasons as well, but as I said, there's a limit to how much I'm going to engage with that. As we continue, it tells us that there is going to be eventually, we're going to figure this out when we move down, there's 20 years of infertility. And I know that not based on her age. I know this based upon his age. He's 40 years old when they get married. And then the next pasuk says, Vayater Yitzchak LaHashem. So Yitzchak, again, Ben Avraham, raised in this nice home, prays. And again, if we looked at last week's parsha, we find Yitzchak praying in the field. Yitzchak prays. Yitzchak is a praying person. He prays, L'nochach ishto ki akarahi. So akara means that based upon nature, she should be unable to have children. Vayater lo Hashem v'ataher Rivka ishto, and God listens to him. So not only is he a praying person, and by the way, remember, also last week, he goes out and prays in the field, and La'it Erev, and then immediately she shows up. So just, again, parallel to the Eved goes La'it Erev, and he says his prayer, and then he sees her. So then we find that Yitzchak goes out to the field and prays, and then immediately he sees her. So it seems to be that same dynamic taking place, whereby immediately we have response. So over here again, God responds to him, and we're told she gets pregnant. And here, we'll start with the beginning of Kaf Bet. And I'm already going to ask you now, and we'll see if you can answer this properly, what's going on. But it says, now, a lot of us immediately will, because we don't know what it means, will immediately identify with the Rashi, which quotes the Midrash, that she finds, again, as Rashi is going to tell us, the two of them are running, they're running back and forth. By the way, there's not a lot of room there to be running back and forth. They're running back and forth. One is trying to get out over here, one is trying to get out over there. And, but let's read the words first. There's some kind of inner turmoil which is taking place. Vatalmir, and she says, "And came lama zanochi." By the way, that's a very strong statement. It's not the only time that Rivka is going to get overly dramatic. She'll do this moving on in the text as well. But she says lama zanochi, which means it's not just that there's something happening. And again, I want you to be able to tell me what it is that's happening. But she also becomes, part of this prayer community. But telech L'drosh et Hashem, and she goes to seek out God, and she's looking for religious significance of what's taking place. So again, you want to read the Rashi, you want to read the Midrash, they're each trying to get out, or she feels something, an inner turmoil which is taking place, and maybe I'll add one or two more things. One is, we have no idea that she knows, right? We have no idea that she knows, or that she could know, is that she's carrying twins. So therefore, if she thinks she's only carrying one, and again, go back to the Midrash, but trying to get out by the shul, as it were, or Beit Midrash of Shem Ve'ever on the one hand, or trying to get out by the Beit Avodah Zarah, is that she feels against some kind of inner turmoil, not knowing that there's more than one fetus. But on the other hand, I can say that there's something else simpler which is taking place. And what's that? And that is that pregnancy, even though most men don't understand it, they think, as it's well known, they think it's akin as having a head cold. But pregnancy could be something which is difficult. It could be something which is even painful. It could be something which is maybe not as easy as one would think that it is. But again, let's pause here for a second.
Especially if you don't know.
Especially, but that doesn't bother. Again, that bothers me much less. It bothers me much less. But pregnancy, because that's exactly the point. That's why you're going to get confused.
Yeah.
No, you didn't hear what I said. That's why you're going to get confused, because you're focusing on the twins. You're not focusing on the problem. Well,
No, what I'm saying is.
I know what you're saying. Sorry to give you a hard time. I know what you're saying, and I'm saying that that's the reason that you're having a hard time figuring out what's really going on. Just know this place is full of anti-Semites. So, no, that's exactly what I want to point out. I said it, and you just accepted it. Childbirth is painful. Why? Chava. So therefore, instead of going back to Chava, you're telling me about carrying twins. Right? But Chava is really the reason over here. Now, what's interesting, if you look in source number 2, and you look at the second pasuk there, the third pasuk, Ela Isha, pasuk Tet Zayin, Ela Isha amar harbe itzvonech v'herunech be'etzav tildi banim. And now I'll ask you, from that moment, when God says this to Chava, going throughout the Chumash, where's the first time that you find a woman who is in some kind of a crisis when she's pregnant? And the answer is Rivka. This is the first time that we're finding it. So therefore, when I said that you're missing the point and that you're focusing on the twins and therefore they didn't do the ultrasound, or the results didn't come in clear, or the technician didn't have enough experience, or so on and so forth, that's not the issue. I understand that having twins further complicates it, but that's not the fundamental issue. One of the words in this verse is harbe itzvonech ve'heronech. What's heronech? Is the pregnancy. Pregnancies are going to be one which will be full of turmoil. And so I'll ask you again, where do you find this coming to fruition in the first time in the Chumash? And the answer is Rivka's pregnancy. So that Rivka now takes her pregnancy and she's reading it within religious terms. You'd have to now ask yourself, well, how well versed is Rivka on her Bible stories, or on her tradition, or on her understanding? Because she is seeing this within theological terms. She's turning to God, and she is questioning as far as, okay, so what is happening, or l'drosh et Hashem. So really kind of in a sense, what do I do now? Now, those of you who are not convinced that I'm right, I know I shouldn't even consider this as a possibility, but those of you who are not convinced that I'm right, so let me add a couple of factors to this to properly frame what's taking place. The first thing is to go back to the response that she gets. And again, I'll repeat myself from previous years. I don't understand why we don't read this at face value. Vatelech l'drosh et Hashem, she seeks God. Vatelech doesn't always mean movement, just like we saw in last week's parsha, when Avram comes to mourn his wife, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's geographical movement. She is moved to turn to God. Vayomer Hashem la, why you need a shliach? Why do you need to come through via somebody else? Why did you have to speak to? It doesn't say that. She seeks God. God says to her, Shnei goyim bevitnech, u'shnei la'umim mime'ach yiparedu la'omi la'omi amatz v'rav yivot sa'ir. So full stop. What was said, what wasn't said, why is this important? And I really, again, want to unpack this, but unpack this through a perspective that I've already given you, and I hope you realize that I'm not moving at this point to Midrashim. I'm just reading what all of this says. One is everything she knows, this is the thing you have to keep in mind, everything she knows is what her husband doesn't know. Why? Vayomer Hashem la. God said to her. That means she knows, he doesn't know. Now you can say, why is there more communication? Why doesn't she tell? Apparently she knows that he's a godly man. Apparently she knows that he is a prophet. Apparently she knows that if God is something that he wants Yitzchak to know, he will say to her. And here really is this outlying prophecy which comes to her as opposed to going to him, and therefore she holds on to it. But just again, keep in mind, what she knows he doesn't know, and therefore you can understand Yitzchak's point of view from her point of view. She knows there's two nations, so therefore what does he think? He thinks that there's one nation, that they're going to separate in two different directions. He thinks that they're going to work together. So therefore, if you want to understand everything going on in this parsha, just take what God says to Rivka, think the opposite of every word, and now you know what Yitzchak is thinking. Yitzchak,
Why wasn't she disclosed?
you want me now to tell you the psychological state of women? Does the Goldwater rule work? Again, to answer your question, I think I just said it. She apparently thinks that if God said this prophecy to her and not to him, then it was for her. And if I wanted to tell him, there were other ways of doing that.
Is there any other communication between him and those two, except when she says she doesn't want to, they're going to marry me, the wrong person?
Don't get excited about things the Torah doesn't tell you. Did Yitzchak and Avraham have any other conversation than that one conversation on the way to the Akedah? Or do you say, and they never spoke again because of the post-trauma that Yitzchak went through? I mean, there's no limit of silly things that people can say and write and publish. But again, I've heard, but they never spoke again afterwards because of, the post-trauma. And I pointed out, and they never spoke before either. So how do you account for that? And it goes back to the same point, is that the Torah does not tell us every one of the conversations that they have. There is this very tender moment where Avi Melech is kind of peeking through the window watching them, so there seems to be a great deal of tenderness. We're told that he loves her. So I'm saying the fact that we don't have more conversations, okay, not every conversation, I've written a whole bunch of books. Very few conversations with my wife are in any of those books, other than the introduction to my first book. I did put a conversation there. Good. So now, again, I just gave you some information. What was it? If you want to understand Yitzchak, read what Rivka knows and just assume the opposite, because that's what he's thinking as opposed to what she's thinking. Now, again, what she understands is really quite extreme, because you would think the two brothers would have at least some kind of relationship. They would be part of the same clan, right? Clan is tribal affiliations. This is the most important thing, by the way, from antiquity going to today. It's probably the most important sociological element, tribalism. And we can't get past tribalism. And the question is how you define your particular tribe. So to be told they won't be part of the same tribe. Again, I just want to go back to where they live, when they live. That itself is really interesting. But so she knows they're not going to work together. She also knows another thing, V'rav Yavot Sa'ir, that ultimately the younger one will be successful. Now, what does she not know? Because it doesn't speak here in terms of good or bad. It doesn't speak in terms of right or wrong, or tzaddik or rasha, which means, again, I don't want to overplay the hand that she's dealt, but how can I overplay it? What can I do to overplay it? And that is, again, before I get to any midrashim, and I keep telling you, I'm going to come to midrashim. I even made up a midrash for this week's, to try to understand something. And maybe I'll share it with you. But there's another element. So in order to understand the other element, let's just continue. And when she gives birth, Pasuk of Daled, V'imlu yimei led, v'nei tomim b'nat. So in fact, as prophetically she was told, there are twins. Esav. And the first one comes out and he's all covered with red. Does that mean red hair? Does that mean blood? Does that mean both? So over here, admoni, Edom. So we have this redness connected to him, and he's called Esav, which also implies a degree of maturity. Asu, he's done, he's completed. And if a person reaches their emotional development by the age of birth, then there's going to be a quite constricted emotional existence. Continue. Also, we note the lack of symmetry. Everyone calls him Esav, or at least both parents, but it's Vayikra Shmo Yaakov, and that's in the singular. So whenever we have a lack of symmetry, and there's a great deal of lack of symmetry in this parsha, lack of symmetry is what we need to note, and therefore Vayikra Shmo Yaakov. V'Yitzchak ben Shishim Shana b'Ledot Otam, and that's where we closed off, and we understand now the 20 years of infertility which had taken place until the children are born. But I want to go back to V'Yado Chezet Ba Akev, and therefore he's called Yaakov, although she doesn't call him Yaakov, and all of us know that later on he's going to actually get a different name. He's going to become Yisrael, because his Yaakov's entire existence based upon holding on to the Ekev of his brother. But I want to go back to what I said before. And what was that? In order to understand this episode, which episode? The pregnancy and subsequent birth of Yaakov and Esav. You first need to understand that the pregnancy is one which is painful, which took us right back to Chava, post-sin, having ingested from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And what happens when you ingest good and evil? You now are carrying good and evil. So therefore, if I then had to divide between the righteous and the wicked, I then go back and I get that much more out of the Chava narrative than I get it out of this narrative, because this narrative has told me they're in two different directions, and the younger will be successful, which itself, by the way, is the entire story of Bereshit, of brothers not getting along and the younger one inevitably being successful. But this actually does something else for me. I'm going to say it again. When I read it together with Bereshit, now you'll accuse me of overreading, so I want to go back to source number 2 again, which is Perek Gimel, and now go back to our Nachash, our serpent, our core of evil. Right? Am I sorry? I'm in the wrong place. Source number 2. V'yomar Shem Elokim El HaNachash. Ki asita zot arurata mikol abima mikol chayat hasadeh al gachoncha telech v'afar tochal kol yimei chayecha. So now the serpent gets cursed. Ve'eva ashit bincha uvein isha uvein zaracha uvein zara hu yishpoch rosh v'ata tushpenu akev. So now notice what suddenly appeared to us in the exact same place, and that is the akev makes its entry over here as part of the tension between the world of good and the world of evil, between the evil of the Nachash, which causes all the difficulties that we have, and between the mankind who is going to emerge as well. So now I'm going to say it again. When Yaakov is born and he's going to be called Yaakov because he's holding on to the Ekev, that should remind you of something, and then you start saying, hold it a second. How do I read together these two sections, because there's something else which is taking place? And this is what's then going to generate those thoughts for us to understand, hold it a second. Does Esav, is he somehow connected to the Nachash? By the way, I told you a number of years ago, this crazy misinterpretation of the Targum Onkelos, because it couldn't understand a word that he used, and there were those who explained that Esav had a big tattoo of a Nachash on his thigh. So don't ask me. If you heard the shiur, you heard the shiur. If you didn't, but again, what that was telling you is that Esav absolutely, not just Esav is a biker and so on, and then he's got the tattoos. He's got a tattoo of the Nachash. He identifies with the Nachash, and therefore the forces of evil in the world. The Nachash is sometimes connected to the Saroshel Esav. And again, if you know this, then you know it. If you don't, then you don't. But my connecting Esav with the Nachash, and therefore Yaakov with this other, and therefore the good and the bad, because that's part of the, I'm going to say it again, part of the problem of ingesting from a tree of knowledge of Tov and Ra is now that Tov and Ra. So now you go back and look what happens to Rivka, who becomes the one who's carrying good, Tov Ra, and she's carrying this good son and this bad son. So again, all that I did just now is, again, you want to accuse me of making up my own midrash, you can. If you want to start searching through all kinds of Kabbalistic sources, all that I'll say is I didn't overly search, but someone has to say what I said. It's not possible that someone didn't, because it's just, all of this is just too obvious. But again, the simpler thing that I did is I took her difficult pregnancy and I read it back to where difficult pregnancies came from. I look at the word, or the letters Ayin Kuf Akev, and I go back and I find that that's the source of Akev. I look at the Tov Ra and I see the Tov Ra, and all that we're doing over here is some cross-pollination between these two sections, and then what emerges over here is, I think, a deeper understanding of our starting point. Now, what's disturbing with all of this? Let's go backwards to something which is troubling. Is Esav therefore destined to be evil before that he's born? Or, again, we're all tainted from this eating of the knowledge of the tree of good and evil, and all of us have to deal with this struggle that takes place within us between good and evil. Because again, I just now read it two ways, especially if I read it and say, well, no, this one is going to work out, or this one isn't. Is God telling us what's going to take place in the future, or is God determining what's going to take place? And I don't want to get into problems of predetermination, because we do know that there's all kinds of biblical characters. You can just choose which one you want. I mean, it sounds very much that Moshe was chosen for his leadership position before he's born. It sounds that way. And once you go to Moshe, you can go to the Haftorah there, and you can find Yirmiyahu as well. And there are various people that's out, but does Esav have free will? Of course he has free will. But I just want to take one more step, and then I'll take your comment. Now, how much of this now is going to be self-fulfilling prophecy? Because now I can start saying, well, of course Esav was Esav, because I'm going to say it, and then I'm going to retract, but let me say it. Because his mother, knowing that he's going to end up being evil and end up being a loser, so therefore he was deprived of his maternal love, and therefore, because his mother didn't love him, so therefore you have this self-fulfilling prophecy taking. And by the way, now I can open up all the psychology books for today, and I can put Esav on the couch, again, go back to our Goldwater rule, put Esav on the couch and say, well, of course, when Rivka was nursing Yaakov, then, it was lovingly, and she took care of him, and she knew that this is going to be the successful child. Maybe she didn't even bother nursing Esav. Maybe Esav was no. So again, but why do I want to retract this just a little bit rather than my self-fulfilling prophecy? Is because the same way that we don't know about various conversations between Rivka and between Yitzchak, you know nothing about the relationship between Esav and Rivka. We know nothing about it. So it's very easy, again, to say, oh, look at all of this, look what happened. And I'll do some of it with you. I'm happy to do it and to show you how but again, how much of this is Esav's own choices and Esav's own, perhaps, superficiality and his own rebellion, and how much do you want to blame on his mother or his father or his parents or whatever, or his teachers, whatever. Listen, it's great to have someone to blame. It really is. And, after 120, you'll go to heaven and God will say to you, what happened to you? Blame me. So you would have given me a better rabbi, then maybe I would have been better. And look what you gave me. This is all of your fault. So, okay, so fine. Take responsibility. Yeah. Right.
That's what it applies.
I'll tell you a secret. It's by all of us. But that's exactly the point. And how much do we deal with it?
Second key was, why do we compare it to the Nachash? What about the Kahn in heaven?
Okay, perfect. Perfect. Do you know there's a Zohar that says they had two different fathers?
What? Say it again?
There's a Zohar that says that they had two different fathers. I wrote about this in two of my books.
Cain and Cain.
Yeah. That Hevel is the son. That Hevel is the son. Hevel is the son of Adam, and it says that Cain is the son of the serpent. But don't take these things overly literal. Again, unless you want to buy my books, then you could take them overly literal. And And it's talking about that where does this evil come from? So it's exactly what I just now read. Evil comes from the Nachash, because that is what the only thing about the Nachash is, if you really you want to understand the Nachash, get 1 minute on the Nachash. The Nachash is before we eat from the tree of knowledge, good and evil, so then the Yetzer Hara is externalized. What happens when you eat from it, then the Yetzer Hara becomes internalized. So what's the difference having an external Yetzer Hara between having an internal Yetzer Hara? So I'll just tell you right now, an internal is worse. Because an external, at least you know that's the Yetzer Hara. When it's internal, then you can justify and convince yourself that the bad thing that you did is actually good. And that's why religious people are so dangerous. There's nothing more dangerous than a religious person doing a mitzvah. Because they're convinced that they're doing everything which is good, but they may not be. Right? As my favorite of Yisrael Salanter, be careful when you put on your talus not to smack somebody else with the strings. Which is both practical advice, but it's also, it's practical advice, but it's also should be seen metaphorically. When you're wrapped up in doing a mitzvah, don't be smacking somebody else, because you're wrapped up in doing a mitzvah, become oblivious of anything else, and then you can step on all kinds of other people because you're doing a mitzvah right now. You're on a mission from God, to borrow from the Blues Brothers. You're somebody who's doing something which is so positive and so good. So I'm saying, religious people doing good things are dangerous. Why? So at least know, I'm doing something good. Again, tzedek tirdof. Some commentaries say, do tzedek, but do it in a tzedek way. Don't do, I'm doing tzedek, so now the ends justify the means, that I can do it any way that I want. So I'm going to say it again, that sometimes the Yetzer Hara, when it's internalized, is more dangerous when the Yetzer Hara is external, because when it's internal, you don't necessarily realize it's the Yetzer Hara. When it's external, you say, that is a snake. That snake wants to kill me. That snake is dangerous. Of course, when you get a tattoo of the snake down your whole thigh, then you become Esav.
Why used to say that when someone says he's doing something L'Shem Shamayim, make sure the Shem Shamayim is L'Shem Shamayim.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly the point. Okay, are we good? Do we at least have some focus right now? Notice, by the way, that the word ekev is used a number of times in Torah, and it's always used as, because of, right? Also, Parshat Ekev is interesting to work into all of this. But just note, for example, in source number 3, where is this? This is immediately after the Akedah. Which again goes to, there will be many of you, which goes back to pregnancy, it goes back to having children. And it says, right, you'll be blessed. Why? Ekev asher shamati b'kolei. Because you listened. And what I skipped along, though I know there'll be a lot of you, and Goya Aretz is also Eretz Yisrael here, which also, all of this sounds actually pretty similar to the prophecy that Rivka is about to get. I mean, just pay attention, because a lot of the elements are there. In source number 4, it's when Yitzchak is told, don't go to Egypt, stay in this land, Gur ba'aretz hazot, again, this is very land-centric, and then the blessing of Avraham is going to come to you, which we all know will eventually begin over to Yaakov, which is why Yaakov is a part of this. If you're a beiti et zaracha, again, same thing, many children. You're going to get all of these lands over here. It goes back to brachas of land. Why? Ekev asher shema Avram b'kolei, and it goes back to this Ekev. So again, just in case any of us are thinking, well, Ekev is this negative thing. No, Ekev is interesting, because Ekev is part of this condition. But I'll say it again: Yaakov is eventually going to get this other name in source number 5. He's going to be told, Lo Yaakov yimod shemecha Kiyim Yisrael, that we're not only going to always be defined based upon our relationship with Esav and based upon holding Esav's heel. At some point, why? Kisarita im Elokim ve'im anashim v'atuchal. It becomes dealing with, and go back and just think about Rivka for a moment. L'drosh et Hashem. She goes to search out God. And there is this element in Yisrael as part of that as well. In source 35, again, his name gets changed, this time by God, as opposed from the Malach. Yaakov ki im Yisrael. And what happens right afterwards? Ani kel shakai parei v'rei kol hagayim goyim. Again, you'll become numerous. And I'm going to give you the land, which is really fascinating, because those various Akevs which were used, which talk about getting the land and being numerous, are now exactly Yaakov's name become Yisrael, and then now the bracha moves over from the Ekev over to the Yisrael. So again, just to notice that whole element. So if we go back to the first source again, I want to go a little bit further. Yaakov is born, Esav is born. Yaakov, the name is only given by Yikra. We later on will get another name, Pasukaf Zayin. Vayigdlu hane'arim, and there's lots of comments on this, including Rashi, that when they're young, they're almost indistinguishable, as much as we imagine them being the same.
Could you explain why the plural by grew?
I kind of explained it, but everyone knew Esav was Esav, but not, Rivka never calls him Yaakov, just for example. Vayikra, Yitzchak calls him. Rivka doesn't necessarily call him, and by the way, when you read later on in the parsha, pay attention to this, she calls him my son, and so she doesn't call him Yaakov, because Yaakov is in relationship to Esav, and she knows he's going to be successful over Esav, so therefore he's called Yaakov by some, but not necessarily by her, and his real name Yisrael emerges later on. So again, in Pasuk of Zion, they grow up, but they're together. Now, some midrashim connect this to their behavior. There's even some that talk about that they're more similar than we imagine sometimes. We always imagine that they're so very different, but let's continue. They grow up, and then Esav ish yodei atzayid ish sadeh. Now it's also interesting the way it frames it. He's a man who knows about hunting and a man of the field. Of course, his father's a man of the field, so but his father's a man in the field by planting in the field. He's the man in the field by hunting in the field, which is not exactly the same. One is productive and one maybe is destructive. V'Yaakov ish tam yoshevo halim. And Yaakov, on the other hand, is either a man of the tents or perhaps a shepherd. You can look at the various Rishonim, how they explain that. Again, a verse which is full of a lack of symmetry. V'yahav Yitzchak et Esav kitzayid b'fiv. Yitzchak loves Esav because, now whatever tzayid b'fiv means, the simpler way of saying this, what we should have said is because he gives him food, which again seems quite superficial. But then it continues, Rivka ohevet Yaakov, without any kind of reason for it, straightforward, she loves him. So again, a lack of symmetry, double lack of symmetry. Well, first of all, one parent loves one, the other loves the other, but one parent loves for a reason and the other loves without a reason. The unconditional love, of course, is the normal love. The conditional love that Esav receives is the strange thing. What we don't necessarily know about is the relationship between Rivka and Esav, or for that matter, between Yitzchak and Yaakov, although we'll learn about a lot of that later on in the parsha, which we're not going to get to. Vayazed Yaakov Nazid. Vayazed Yaakov Nazid. Yaakov prepares some food. Nazid should be some kind of beans. Some of you want to be more optimistic, you can say cholent. Vayavo Esav min hasadeh v'hu ayef. Of course, you notice the emphasis on the word ayef. What it doesn't say is what we remember it saying, and that is that he's hungry. It doesn't say he's hungry, it says he's tired. Vayomer Esav el Yaakov hali'iteni, which is a term used, Rashi will point out, borrowed from animals, kind of pour into my mouth, which means he's so exhausted he can't even lift his arms. I mean, that's quite exhausted. Pour into my mouth, min ha'adom hadom hazeh. That's also really a primitive way of speaking. There's some regression over here. He's describing the food not by what it is, by what it looks like, by almost the physical stimuli. And the fact that it's red goes back to his own redness and probably feeling some kind of an association with it. Give me some of the red stuff is not, again, I have not been in any French Michelin-rated restaurants, but I do not believe that's how you order, right? I believe that you order in a somewhat more sophisticated manner, and the way that he's ordering here is give me some of the red stuff over there goes back to this exhaustion. Ki ayef anochi. Ki ayef anochi, so pour this, meaning the ayef anochi is the important thing over here. Al ken korashmo Edom. That's exactly my point. That's correct. That's good. And that's why he's called Edom. But again, there seems to be, I use the word regression, and you can counter and say, well, how do you know there was ever any progression? But it seems to be that he's speaking in a way. But there's something else that you need to pay attention to before we read any further. And that is, I'm going to ask you a question, and you're going to have a harder time with the answer than you think. So was Esav a good hunter? Was he a successful hunter? So let's just think about this snapshot, because it's one of the only ones we have. So he comes in from the field, so presumably he comes in. How do I know he came in from the field? He comes from the, right? It says, Vayavo Esav min hasadeh. So he's an ish, what does it say? Yodei tzayid ish sadeh. So he knows about hunting. So is he the kind of guy who knows all about hunting, but is he a good hunter? I'm going to say it again. He knows all about hunting. Is he? And he came home empty-handed. And how do we know he came home empty-handed? Because and by the way, think about the terrible situation over here. Our Esav, who is a man who's involved with death. Again, when you plant, you're involved with life. When you kill, you're involved with death. Esav, our wannabe hunter, comes home from the field without any hunt. And not only does he come home without any hunt, think about even the worst part of this, he ends up getting for dinner a vegetarian stew. I don't know what can possibly be worse than this. It was I don't know what could be worse than this.
Maybe he was so tired because it said, he didn't have time to prepare for himself.
Yeah, but it doesn't say he brought anything. And you know what? I have a feeling Esav would have eaten machal ben dersai, which, if you don't know what that is, it's a technical term used in the Talmud, which by the almost raw. Which, by the way, the reputation that ben dersai has, not based on the Gemara, the reputation is that he's a thief, and therefore he'd steal food and then he would cook it really quickly. It does not say that in the Gemara. That's rather the read that some Rishonim have on it, but it doesn't say that. That rather Machal ben dersai is, and it may be a difference in the Bab of the Yerushalmi, but Machal ben dersai is considered to be the minimum amount, so you take it. I mean, how long does it take to take some, you throw it on, again, I get the feeling from Esav that he would have eaten Avram and Achai. The animal's dead, so you rip off the thing, you throw it on the grill, you turn it over, or even bring it to Yaakov and say, Yaakov, we got some steaks for dinner. Again, this should not be all, but instead I'm exhausted, give me the vegetarian stew. You don't, if you're not catching this point, you're not catching the full pathos of this situation. And I'm going to say it again stronger. For the ostensibly the meat-loving, hunting Esav to be reduced to rely on his brother, right? To rely on his brother to give him the food. So again, you want to read into this Esav, who's lacking the maternal love, now is to turn to his brother for nurturing from his brother. Itself becomes a real interesting dynamic. He needs someone to take care of him. He needs someone to feed him. He needs someone to, and I'll say it again, and the tragedy over here of not even having meat for dinner. So this is, when we're reading this, we realize that there's something terribly wrong going on with Esav. Now, Chazal do tell us the background of the story. And I suspect a lot of us know this Chazal. It appears in a couple of places. Rashi, actually, in source number 9, brings a lot of it. If you look at source 9, we'll start with Pasuk Kaftet. V'hu ayef piritzicha. He's been murdering all day. Now, if you're murdering all day, so why haven't you dragged home any game? Well, ritzicha doesn't mean killing, again, unless you are a vegetarian. You wouldn't use the word murder by hunting. You would use murder killing people. It says that Esav was involved in killing people, not necessarily in hunting. Now, that itself is quite frightening, and it actually brings a verse to support this. Pasuk Lamed Haliteni. Over here, open your mouth and let me open my mouth and pour the food the way that a camel will eat. Why is a camel interesting? Why is a camel interesting? What about we have some animals that have, but kosher animal, yeah. So therefore,
on the outside, externally it appears that it's good, but on the inside it's not.
Perfect. And what does that tell you about Esav? Right. So it's perfect. So it's perfect that Esav over here may have been fooling some people, but he, again, feed me like an animal, which actually should reveal a little bit more. It continues and it says, Min adom adom, adashim adumot. So what was this? Adashim adumot. It's red. Adashim has to be lentils, or it can't be a kidney bean. It can't. Okay, okay, fine. Red lentils. Red lentils don't stay red when you cook them.
No.
I've tried this many times. They don't stay red. So maybe they were also machal ben dursai. They weren't fully cooked at this point. I don't know what to say. Anyway, Voto yom met Avram. Okay, so that just now gave us some more information. Avram Avinu died on that day. Shelo yiret Esav ben beno yotze letarbut ra'ah. So he doesn't see Esav go off the derech. Right. That would be the term over here. So if you want a little bit more background, and it says that he dies, therefore, and he's making this as food to give to the mourners. So let's have a full stop. Everything I'm about to say is really going to be the background in the Gemara in source number 11 in Baba Batra, and it's also going to be in some of the Midrashim, but let's stop for a second and try to unpack some of this. What is the basis of what we just now read? So it says in source 11, Gemara Baba Batra, Kitanai, Vashem berachat Avram bakol. Avram was blessed with everything. The kol, again, is going to be connected to Yaakov as opposed to Esav, Yeshli Rav, Yeshli Kol. So he's blessed with kol. So kol is Yaakov, not Esav. So it's actually, did you follow that? Kol is Yaakov, it's not Esav, because again, that's the argument or the discussion of Yaakov and Esav when they meet. Esav says, Yeshli, I have a lot of stuff, I don't need it, and Yaakov says, Yeshli Kol, I have everything. Over here it also is Bakol Mikol Kol, that Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov are all connected to Kol. So over here it says, Avram was blessed with Kol. So what does Bakol mean? So the first opinion here that I skipped, the dot, that he had a daughter, what was her name? Bakol, right? Lauren Bakol, right? So he has it actually, Gemara, no, well, it doesn't say Lauren. The Gemara says that he had a daughter, and that's how he was blessed with everything. Listen, only have a son is not good enough. I suspect my daughter would like this Dvar Torah after 4 sons, right? Davar Achar, and now we're skipping a little bit. Now, there's another thing that says, how was he blessed with everything? Shalom Arad Esav Biyamav. That he never saw Esav go. Now, let's do math for a second. I apologize, it's easy math. How old was Avram when Yitzchak was born? 100 years old. How old was Yitzchak when Yaakov and Esav were born? 60 years old. How old was Avraham when the boys were born? 160. See how easy that was? How old was Avram when he died? 175. How old were the boys? 15 years old. That's the easiest math you'll ever heard. If you didn't follow that, give up. Okay? So, what's the question, which is not really a question, which they're making believe is a question? How old was Yitzchak when he died? He's 180 years old. So why, I'm saying, none of this is really a good question. Yaakov dies 147, right? Sarah, I mean, like stop, but no. Why does Avram only live to 175 and not to 180? So it says that he actually should have lived to 180. But God took him away 5 years earlier, so as not to see his grandson go off the derech, because it would have killed him. Then anyway, he would have died at 175. So when it says that God blessed him with everything, what did he bless him with? He blessed him with an early death. Like what is like interesting, if you want, interesting. So by the way, Esav is connected to death. Esav killed Avraham. Wow.
5 years.
Esav killed Avraham. And he either killed him because of him, he dies early, or Avraham would have lived and then he would have died when he saw Esav. Esav killed Avraham. So who did he kill that day? He killed Avraham. Okay, so that's not really what the Gemara said, but I hope you... Ritzicha. I said, I hope you appreciate what we just now read. It says, on that day Avram died in order to not see Esav. And he goes, God took 5 years off him, right? Why? Because Yitzchak lived 180 years and he only lived 100, right? So why is he making beans? Because he's making the meal that we give the Avelim after the funeral. So I just want to stop for a second. There's something really interesting which is going to be circular now. Avram dies as not to see Esav. Now, what happens to Esav when Avraham dies? And the answer is that Esav has a religious crisis. What's his religious crisis? The greatest man he ever knew, the greatest man who's ever lived, died. So there's death everywhere. Esav is a man of death. We'll see more about his man of being connected to death in a moment. If an Avram Avinu could die, basically you have a situation of tzaddik v'ralo, and why even bother? So the first time that Esav is going to have to contend and deal with the death of a righteous person, he is going to have a complete breakdown. Now, why did that righteous person die? He died because of him. Why did he die because of him is not to see him go off the derech. Why does he go off the derech? Because Avram died. Okay, so yes. But you can all say to me, but what are you talking about? All of this goes back to the Nachash. All of this goes back to the Eitz Hadas Tov Ra. But none of this is predetermined. All of this is going to have to do with how Esav is going to choose to respond to situations. Because how does Yaakov respond to death? Yaakov's response to death Yaakov's response, listen, let professionals do this. Yaakov's response to death is doing a mitzvah, is doing chesed, which means how do I respond to a tragic situation? What good can I do for the world? There are people who are in pain. How do I help those people? How do I help my father who's mourning right now? So therefore, Yaakov's response to death is it's action-oriented, it's empathetic, it's doing something, it's helpful, it's turning tragedy into chesed. And by the way, again, I got up from Shiva a couple of weeks ago, and the various, the amount of food coming in, and the people, and also the people who sent, takeout from a restaurant. Okay, good. It's not things that you just, assume people do until you see it and are the beneficiary, and you realize, to what extent people have this feeling of, and again, and forget the meal, the people who just walk in with a cake and put it on the table very quietly without saying a word, and they do things like that, because people want to be a part of doing something which is good and doing something which is kind and being part of a solution and part of a problem. And there is something very tender in this, and the way that Chazal are reading Yaakov's behavior over here is that Yaakov is taking initiative and doing something which is positive, and Esav, our hunter, could, by the way, just as easily had come in with a whole spread as well. Okay, he goes out and he could have brought in a whole thing, right? Other than Moroccans, people eat meat I don't know if you know, Moroccans don't eat meat during Shiva, at least some don't. But we eat meat during Shiva, and he could have brought him some meat, he could have brought him all kinds of things, he could have taken care of his father, who... Don't go so far that he doesn't know. Let's continue a little bit. Let's go. You're being too nice. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, later on in the Gemara, Chamesh avirot avar oto rasha ba'oto yom ba al na'ara mu'urasa. He had relations with a girl, a woman who was engaged. So she's like officially married to somebody else. So therefore, we're going for all the Sheva Mitzvah B'nai Noach right now, or at least, 10 commandments, right? V'haragat hanefesh, and he killed somebody. V'kafar bi'ikar, and at this moment he denies God's existence. V'kafar b'tchir hametim, and he denies that there's such a thing as resurrection. V'shat et ha'bechorah, and he rejected the Bechorah as well, the being the firstborn. So, and then it's going to continue and lay out each one of these things, and the Gemara is going to show you where it got each of this from. Which means, if I'm going to now move over from psychology to philosophy, how you describe what the Gemara is describing in terms of Esav, this would be not nihilism. This would be saying that basically, okay, most of you would only know this if you read philosophy, which is really unfortunate, or if you watched too much Woody Allen when you were younger, which is a better chance of you having any kind of knowledge of this. But essentially, it's a feeling that that life is painful. There's no reason to live. That there's no purpose in life. It's something that you find in philosophy as Christianity is being eclipsed in terms of the intellectual history of late Europe, whereby there's no longer religion as the basis of life. Now, what takes its place? And what you have is a lot of people just feeling emptiness. And then you have various philosophers who are going to deal with this emptiness, and some, like Kierkegaard, will see it as the energy which will then help create the leap of faith and the search for meaning. You go for emptiness, right, from tohu vavohu, to try to fill it up and to find meaning within it. Or what you do is you say, well, life essentially has no meaning whatsoever, and if life has no meaning and there's no rules, there's no boundaries, and it just becomes a search for, well, let's start with the girl that he's sleeping with right now. And again, you want to blame his mother, you can blame his mother for everything, but let's start with Esav's sexual sins. So over here we have, the Gemara reads into it and says, it happened that day when he's 15. Okay, good. Where do we actually find Esav's, I'm going to call it a sexual rebellion if you want to, make it a little bit nicer. You could put it in nicer terms. Where do you actually find it?
Why?
So, okay, good. When Esav gets married, where do we find that Esav gets married? I'm sure I have this someplace over here. Esav, 12. 12 is as good as any other number. Sorry. In 12, yes. Source number 12, the second pasuk there, Lamed Daled, V'hi Esav ben Arim Shana v'ikach isha Yehudit bat Beri hachiti v'et basmat bat Ilan hachiti. So, 25 years later. Good. So you're saying that in terms of the timeline, this doesn't work at all. But let me point something else out. Now you see I'm smiling already, because you know I'm going to say something which is clever. So these girls, or these women, however you prefer, let's go back to tribalism. So what tribe are they from? Better. It says. Why can't we read the words? Right. Where do the Hittite live? The Hittites. Where do they live? Where in Canaan? We met them. We know them. Where did we find them?
They buried where
the Marah Machpelah is. So where do they live? They live by Hebron. So now, explain to me, how does Esav hook up with these women who live near Hebron? Now, let me just continue the point. If you chart Yitzchak's life from after he meets Rivka, or when he meets Rivka, all the way through till Esav gets married at 40, you never find Yitzchak in any place other than the absolute south of the country. Beersheva, Aza, right? Look at the pasuk before. Vayizra Yitzchak ba'eretz hahi. What are we talking about? We're talking about all Grar. We're talking about places which are all the way the south of the country, not by Hebron. The only time that you find him by Hebron, there was one time that you found him by Hebron, and when was that? By the funeral that's pshat in the Torah. It says that Yitzchak and Yishmael buried their father by Marat HaMachpelah, which goes back. So now, I'm going back to, when does that happen? Try again, when he's 15, when they're 15. So when they're 15, there's a funeral to go to. Whose funeral? Avraham. They go to the funeral, and what's Esav doing? This is the medrash I'm making up. Is that during the grandfather's funeral, Esav, who is in great pain, now adopts a philosophy of nihilism. Everything is meaningless. Avram is dead. Nothing counts. Why be good? And he starts breaking down all the kinds of rules in the world. By the way, according to the Midrash, who does he kill? We can look inside if you want to see it. Who does he kill? He kills Nimrod that day as well. So therefore, the two sides, good and evil, right? Go back to if you want earlier in terms of the Eitz Hadat Tov Ra. They both, according to the Medrash, both Avram and Nimrod die on the same day. But I'm saying now there's going to be a new Avram and Nimrod. And what was Nimrod, of course? Nimrod is a hunter. So what do you have now? What was Avram? A man who makes his living in the tents. What is Yaakov? Yaakov is a man of the tents. So over here you have Avram and Nimrod dying on the same day, and you have Esav taking out of this, so why bother? Everybody dies. Well, both died at his hands. That's really what I'm claiming. He actually kills both of them. He kills Nimrod that day. That's the Retzach that he does. But he also, by extension, kills Avraham. He goes and he's involved, again, during the funeral. He's hooking up with these girls. Now, maybe, this is the part I can't prove, or you can't disprove, is that maybe when it's time to get married, and he's always superficial, his father got married at 40, so he gets married at 40. Who does he marry? Well, he marries two girls. Well, why does he marry two girls? Well, you're going to go back to the psychological problem. He's grown up without a mother figure. He's looking for something to take the place of his life. He turns to Eros because he does not have actual, a strong emotional life. So that all of the two-bit psychology you can throw into all of this, but we're running out of time, so I just want to point out two more things. Okay? One thing that I want to point out is that there's another biblical character who also loses his mother at a relatively early age. I say also. Okay, grows up without a mother. And who's that? Yosef. Yosef ends up being the complete opposite. And this I need to nuance a little bit more to make sure that we get it properly. When we continue in the first source, Yaakov's response right away is, if you're not going to even be a successful hunter, right, part of the problem is he's not taking responsibility. See, also when it says tzayid b'piv, a number of the commentators, including Rashi, say is that he would fool his father with the words that he would say. What took them in that direction? Because he never brings food. He doesn't bring food. So then he's a talker. Oh, he's like the fisherman who talks about the one that got away, but he doesn't really succeed in doing this. So what kind of hunter? So it says then that he goes and he asks his father, and you all know the Rashi, do I take meiser out of salt or out of tevin or out of straw? Now think about it. His father, that was the other pasuk I skipped before, the Medrash understands that Yitzchak took meiser. So that's the mitzvah of Yitzchak, so he wants to connect to it, but he doesn't do it. He just talks, he doesn't do anything. And part of the problem with Esav is, again, what did it say in the Gemara and in the Midrash? He doesn't believe in the world to come. But what does he believe in? That's the problem. He believes in the here and now. And therefore, when Yaakov turns to him and says, will you sell your future, the birthright? What does the birthright include? It includes the promise to Avram. It includes 400 years of slavery. It includes the land of Israel. Esav is here and now. No, I'll trade all of that for a bowl of beans. And they're not even magic beans, right? I'll trade everything there for what I have in front of me right now. That's the problem of Esav, a lack of believing in the future. So what does the Gemara do with this? He doesn't believe in Olam Haba. He doesn't believe in Tchiyat HaMetim. He only believes in the snapshot of right now, and that's part of being tired. Ayef anochi. Ayef. He's tired of who he is. He's tired of his life. This is depression. This is an inability of dealing with the life that he has. And what's the opposite of depression? Again, I'm going to say, I really want to be clear on this. What is all of us could, it's correct. What's better than that? All of us can have something bad happen to us, and all of us could, again, be stuck in the present. That's depression. The opposite of depression is saying, well, tomorrow will be better. Just believe in the future. Tomorrow's going to be a better day. I'm going to go to sleep. I'm going to get up in the morning. Sun's going to shine. I'll have a nice cup of coffee. Life is going to be good again. Which means if you believe in the future, then you're able to deal with the present. It's the person who has no hope in the future who can't deal with the present, because why do I believe tomorrow's going to be better? Esav is tired. Esav is depressed. Esav now believes in nothing. Avram is dead. There's nothing to believe in. And then for Yaakov is calling him on this. And he goes, well, what about the future, the birthright? By the way, the birthright may go back to trauma of birth. Again, lack of relationship with his mother, perhaps. But it's funny, because as the firstborn, he turns his mother into a mother, but nonetheless, she seems to only be a mother of his brother, who, again, a slightly different relationship. Now let's try this again. Yosef, he loses his mother. Is he lost in depression? What does he do? He believes in the future. How do you know he believes in the future? He's a dreamer. He dreams. This is what's going to take place. Yosef is the greatest dreamer that we have, who believes that such, elaborate, perfect, everything's going to happen. So look at the Esav and Yosef. And by the way, Yitzchak is all future oriented as well. Yitzchak will laugh. It's in the future. Yitzchak sees things in the future, and Esav sees things in the present. Esav is stuck in the present. The present is bad. Avram dies. It's never going to get any better. There's nothing to believe in. So he believes in nothing, and therefore he has this life of searching to solve the pain that he's in by fleeting relationships, and maybe he doesn't believe in life, so he kills. But he doesn't even kill for a purpose, because he has nothing to bring home afterwards, because we don't see him. By the way, there's even this terrible Targum Yonatan, I have it here on the page someplace, that later on when his father tells him to go hunt, so I give you a bracha, it says that he ends up bringing a dog and feeds it and wants to feed it to Yitzchak. So it's who the Yitzchak already ate earlier that day. And it's trying to say the same thing. Esav's not a successful hunter. He's Yodei Tzayid. He knows all about it. But even that, he doesn't do it in a successful way. And that's why, again, I'm pointing out in this terrible scene over here, where he comes home exhausted. And I keep saying it, he's exhausted, he's tired. Tiredness, exhaustion has to do not with hunger. You could be very hungry, but he can't even cook. He can't even do anything. And now Yaakov calls him on it, and that's what the Gemara understands. You look at Yosef. Yosef believes in the future. Now go back to that moment where Yosef also has an opportunity to solve all of his problems with a fleeting relationship. And what does he say? No, there are rules, and it's wrong. And again, Esav, there's no rules, which means, again, this goes back to his nihilism. There's no rules. Why be good? It doesn't make a difference. There's no standards. And instead, what does Yosef stand up? Yosef preaches. Yosef says, this would be wrong morally between me and your husband. This would be wrong morally between me and God. And now you look at the difference between a Yosef and an Esav. Again, and if you're not aware of this, there is this great teaching. It says that as soon as Yosef is born, where do we have this? That as soon as Yosef is born, source 19, Vayikisha yadai Rachel et Yosef v'yom Yaakov alavan shelcheni. Let me go. But hold it, why can he go now? Isn't Esav still waiting for him and said that I'll kill you? Look at Rashi. Mishanolad sitno shel Esav. Yosef is Esav's the Satan, and who's the Satan? Who's his adversary? Yosef. Shenema v'hi beit Yaakov eish u'beit Yosef lahava. Quote, that's from Ovadia. V'hi beit Yaakov eish u'beit Yosef lahava u'beit Esav lakash. Who's going to burn the teven that Esav only talks about? Again, Esav's a talker. Who's going to burn that? Yosef can take him down. But now you see, again, there's other levels of this that I've said at other points. But now you look over here and you see this Yosef versus Esav comparison. It's great because they're both coming from theoretically a similar type of a situation, and Yosef difference. Yosef has morality in the present and believes in the future, does not look for short-term solutions to all of his problems. Esav is willing to sell his whole future for a short-term solution right now, and to live your life that way is not going to be a very happy type of life. There's one other person who the Medrash tells us that we should be comparing him to, and that is, if you look at source 24, Vayetziv Rishon Admoni, and it says, there's lots of firsts over here. Go down to the last paragraph, Admoni. It says, Ki'ilu Shofech Damim. His spilling of blood is all, you can see it. It says, Nityarev Amar sorry. Here it's quoting that when, in the Pasuk in Shmuel, which is in source 23, and that's when David HaMelech is born, it says, Nityarev Amar Avzeh Shofech Damim Ke'esav, Amar LaKadosh Baruch Hu, Im Yefei Yinayim. Esav midat atzma horeg, avazeh midat Sanhedrin horeg. That David had the same qualities as Esav, but he had soft eyes, he had kind eyes. By the way, eyes is what allows you to see. And therefore he sees things also for potential in the future, and there's a kindness to him. But also notice something, that Yosef and David together, those are the two Mashiachs. Mashiach ben Yosef, Mashiach ben David. Kabbalistically, Yosef is Yesod. Yesod is actually the thing which is Tzaddik Yesod Olam. It's Shomer HaBrit. It's the person who's able to control urges, whereby Esav is the Klipa, is the opposite of Gvura. and he's the one who uses gvura not in terms of self-control, but in terms of controlling others and again doing terrible things. While you find that David HaMelech ultimately is the one who is the legitimate one who uses power, but he uses power with complete authority in ways which are proper and ways which are regal, which eventually in the future is what brings about a type of redemption. So I go back to Esav and I go back to my questions of predetermination. And God is saying that they're going to go in two different directions. Both of them have capabilities, which means you could take everything about Esav and become a Yosef, and everything about him and become a David. And you can use all of this in a positive way, or you can use all of your life circumstances as an excuse for the reason why nothing's ever going to work out, but that's going to add into this other thing, this immediate gratification, which, by the way, goes right back to Eve. Eve sees the tree and wants it right then, immediate gratification. I mean, there are teachings that had she waited till the next day, maybe it would have been permitted at a later point, but that's the immediate gratification. It goes right back over there. But there's always going to be these two different strands. One is going to, again, and this is the good versus the evil, even when they're internalized. Do I just say, I need this, I need it now, and whatever are the consequences, who cares, that's in the future? Or do I say that no, there are rules and there are laws, and I need to be able to do things in the proper way, and I need to be able to be decent? Yaakov is the one who responds to death by turning this into compassion. On the other hand, Esav returns to death by saying all of life is meaningless and there is no future whatsoever, and I may as well just do anything that I want. The same qualities that creates an Esav, and again, I'm getting rid now of all the psychology and all the philosophy, but I'm going straight to the Kabbalistic sources, but the same energy which can create an Esav could have been used in a different way and could produce a Yosef, could produce a David. And even imagine a David and a Yosef coming together and working together within one personality. So Esav is very strong, but Esav ends up becoming incredibly superficial, and he allows this moment of death to become somebody who is completely wrapped up in death. So therefore, what is his response going to be when he says, sell me the birthright, back in the first verse, Pasuk Lamed Ber, V'yomer Esav, Hinei anochi alech lamut. I'm going to die. Everyone's going to die. Everything is meaningless. Like, what difference does any of this make? And the answer is, it does make a difference. And there is decency to do. And even in the face of death. And we can take care of mourners. And we can reach out to people who are in pain. And we can try to lift people up who are on the ground. And we can try, but Esav is not interested. Esav is somebody who uses his first meeting with death to, again, for excuse for everything. And as I said, I'm willing even to take his later meeting with the Hittite girls and say, well, when did that happen? Midrashically, that works perfectly. That first happens on this day, and the only thing that he did later on is to marry two of them. Why do you need to marry two of them? It goes back to the same problem. And again, while he is trying to somehow superficially follow his father, he's actually going completely against his father and his grandfather, especially what Avram said, not to marry somebody who's local. So Esav ends up proving that, again, what do we see? He's superficial. He's not even a good hunter. He ends up having to eat a vegetarian dinner. I don't know what kind of bigger punishment there possibly could have been.